Thank you for this opportunity to present to you. And I will be talking about applying the Society for Risk Analysis quality test to cultural property risk analysis. And that's me. I am mostly with the consulting firm Protect Heritage Corp, but also have association with Canadian Museum of Nature and an adjunct assistant professor at Queen's University. So, the risk analysis quality test is a set of 76 questions to evaluate the quality of a risk analysis project or program, and in particular, the quality as it relates to its usefulness, reliability, correctness for guiding risk management. This was a project of the Applied Risk Management Specialty Group, and really under the leadership of John Lathrop, who will be speaking a bit later, it became this publication as Release 1.0 of the SRA Risk Analysis Quality Test. It is available on our website now. Now, my interest was in applying this to cultural property risk analysis, and just as a bit of explanation, in that form of risk analysis, we're really undertaking risk ranking and screening, and we use the hierarchical holographic modeling approach that Yakov Hames has published, and we do this to inform all decision makers involved in protecting cultural heritage. And there's quite a diversity from curators, collection managers, registrars, and conservators through facilities managers, security managers, and right to museum directors and boards of trustees. They all make decisions that will impact the preservation of cultural property. So we need to inform and communicate to them. But it definitely is a ranking and screening exercise. This looks at 19 collection units at our Canadian Museum of Nature, exposed to 22 of what we call generic risks. Actually, there would have been about 80 specific risks that were assessed, but these are gathered into about 24 generic risks. And we notice that they quantitatively cover a huge range, nearly to 1 or anticipating total loss of the collection over 100 years, down to about 1 part per million, or just a very small change. And this tells us that when we're measuring risks, we're really not interested in these very detailed kind of estimates. Is it 27.1234 or 0.1232. That's not at all what it's about. We're really interested in, is the risk going to be 1 part per 1,000 or 1 part per 10,000? That's more on the scale of a meaning. There are several ways in which I expect that the risk analysis quality tests will be applicable to cultural property risk analysis, at least a few ways. One is to seek constant improvements in our system that we're applying. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about mostly here today, where I'm going to be considering 2 recent cases, our Canadian Museum of Civilization and the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, about 3-year projects to implement that are just now coming to an end. So I'm going to review how those implementations went from the framework of the RAQT and look for areas of improvement. but it could also be useful for guiding application planning. And one of my colleagues, Melissa King, is working at the Smithsonian Institution to see how the RAQT might guide risk analysis evaluating storage improvement options for the large mammal skeleton collection. And finally, but I think very important, but not yet touched upon, would be to use the RAQT to differentiate between high quality applications of risk analysis to cultural property preservation and naive amateur approaches, because there are many different approaches now being suggested, and some of them are ideal for certain applications, but their promoters tend to say they're really the ideal thing for any kind of application. And we need a method to indicate the quality of any given method for a given application. Now, what I took was looking at the 76 questions in the RAQT and judging past practice, where 0 would say, I just don't think this question is applicable to that application of, and then using the numbers 1 to 7 to range from, for past practice, extremely deficient to excellent in the case of a 7. For potential benefit of considering how our systems could be improved by considering in detail that question in the RAQT. Again, 0 is just, I don't think it's applicable. 1 for really no expected benefit of thinking about this question, through to 7, where there would be a great benefit of thinking about that question in refining our system. Now, this is just an overall scattergram of how these questions came out. In this area, 0, 0, it doesn't seem applicable to our system in past practice and doesn't really seem like it could help very much. In this whole area, it's rather sparsely populated. I don't know, that may actually indicate that I didn't lay out the judgment scales all that well, or I just didn't really know how to use them all that well, or whatever. But I don't think that matters that much. We don't have time to consider all of these questions. And we were able to identify a number of questions where perhaps diluted, but I think our existing system is really very good at applying, or that our current practice is very good with respect to what these questions are seeking to find out. In this area, our current practice seems not so good, at least under the midway point, and 5 or 6 in terms of potential benefit of considering those questions. So that tends to be on, we do expect there to be considerable benefit. Now this one seems really quite curious. We really think our current practice is quite good, but also the question seems to suggest that there's considerable room for improvement. So that seems a curious result, and I'll speak to that very briefly at the end of this. Now, let's consider this area where we thought that our past practice was excellent, actually, not being too modest about it, and the potential benefit of thinking further about those RAQT questions, these particular ones, would have really no value. So what were these? Well, we had A7, and I'm going to paraphrase these, so John, please don't shoot me for this, but just to keep within our time, I thought I do well just to paraphrase what we're talking about here. The A7 questions, A7.1, 2, and 3, all had to do with the relevance and quality of information provided to decision makers, because that's so much the focus of how our system was developed. I think we do quite well already at that. B1 question had to do with structured, clear scenario definitions. Also, that's a primary focus of this way of working, so I think we do rather well at that already. Finally, the M2, the model analysis and validation, are really well described and well documented. So again, I think we're doing rather well there and not that much room for improvement. However, let's now move over to this quadrant where we see that our past practice was either absent, neglected completely, ranging to poor or a little poorer than average, we might say. And the potential benefit rates is a 5 or 6. So we would consider that really quite a high potential benefit of thinking more about these questions and how we might improve our systems through focusing on addressing these questions. So here, H2, adequate data management system. And here I put this in italics because we actually knew from the get-go that this would be a challenge. We encouraged the client to address this right away, but for various reasons that was not taken up on. And data management was what made the projects much more inefficient than they needed to be. Questions A1, N1 have to do with the goal being well announced and explained terminology. The goal well announced and explained and terms well defined, but they were not well communicated to all stakeholders. So I think here we have some real room for improvement. Although the terms were well defined, they were not well communicated. And finally, G3 and 4, limited knowledge and surprises affecting management were well communicated. And there, I'd have to say, no, not really. This remains a challenge, that where we do have limited knowledge and we do recognize that there could be some nasty surprises down the road, we still don't have any very good means of communicating that. I shouldn't blame others, but it really is, I think, largely influenced by limited time of risk management decision makers to really engage in these results. But clearly we feel that this is an area that we could improve on, so we ought to. Now finally, here's this rather strange outlier where past practice we think is kind of very good, but the potential benefit is also really great. So G2 is the strength of knowledge well characterized? Well, you know, in a nutshell, we do claim that all of our risk analysis is based on our best current understanding, and that really is true. However, our best current understanding can really be quite poor. So this is sort of bizarre. We do feel that we are honestly characterizing it well, but it's kind of in the form of a tautology. So in a sense, it's not all that useful. To my mind, this is really a bit of an outstanding issue, and if anybody has any thoughts on how we get around this kind of conundrum where we think we're communicating well and yet it's really not all that useful the way that we're communicating it, I'd really like someone's insights. I'm a little bit baffled by what we should be doing here. And in conclusion, 76 questions in the RAQT really seem daunting. I know I was rather daunted when I even thought about doing this kind of brief presentation, but it was actually much easier than anticipated. So that's a bit of good news. And I found it did provide guidance and priorities for improvements in the system. So with that, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to any comments or questions you may have.